There we are. Hi, everyone. I know we've got attendees all across the globe, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are here to discuss the common pitfalls and best practices of building a B2B marketplace. And we are very fortunate to have Sebastian Huckles and Michael Frisby with us today. If each of you would please take a few seconds and introduce yourselves to our audience, I will appreciate it.
Michael, you want to go first?
So, hi everybody. So, Michael Frisby. I've spent more than 20 years of my professional life helping sell B2B cloud services into small businesses. I've worked across the IT value chain for vendors, most of that time at Microsoft. Worked in distribution, worked for cloud service providers and MSPs. And I now run my own consultancy business, focused on helping vendors and MSPs grow their businesses, and particularly where cloud marketplaces are a part of their go-to-market strategy.
Cool. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sebastian Huckles. Similar to Michael, I think I started my journey into cloud marketplaces somewhere in 2005, so close to 20 years. Working on implementing and operating cloud marketplaces, building them out, architecting them, managing them from a product management point of view, a solution architecture point of view. So I've seen pretty much almost every side of the cloud marketplace, from support staff to operational IT operations, architecture, software development, and product management. So.
Excellent. Thank you both. So it could go without saying, but it won't. We've got a ton of experience in the room today. So thank you both for bringing that to bear. Super excited about the conversation today. What we're going to talk about from a high level is, again, building a B2B marketplace and really the trends and opportunities in 2025. So we'll talk about it strategically, technically, and operationally, best practices and key industry trends for building and scaling successful cloud marketplaces in today's environment. So without further ado, I'd like to hop into topic number one. So topic one is key B2B marketplace trends. We want to identify really what the key innovations and the trends are when shaping cloud marketplaces and understanding the changing needs of buyers and sellers, which frankly seem to be changing as quickly as ever. So let's kick this off. Michael, if you don't mind, what major trends are changing how buyers and sellers engage with cloud marketplaces? And which capabilities are emerging as must-haves to meet those expectations?
Sure. So I think for me, the first piece is there's an absolute explosion of marketplaces going on out there. A lot of that driven by a need for personalization, where the end customers want a marketplace which is personal to them, and whoever their service provider is curating the solutions that are required for that end customer. So you're seeing ultimately millions of marketplaces popping up. When people think about marketplaces, they might just think about the big hyperscalers, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles of this world. But there's a real proliferation of millions of personalized marketplaces out there. You're getting a lot of AI and automation being built into those marketplaces to streamline recommendations and the provisioning and within those marketplaces. A big key piece is the end user experience, making sure that you want, even though it's a B2B marketplace, we're all used to consumer services these days, and you want that experience for a B2B buyer to be as easy as it is for a consumer. You're also seeing an aggregation across those different clouds. So one enterprise buyer might want to be buying from Amazon and from Microsoft, different capabilities, different service offerings, but want a single place to go across that. And you see some of those big hyperscalers building ecosystems and platforms in there. So it's not just their own services, it's bringing lots of different ISVs into there. And I think the final piece you see is not just the traditional subscription pricing, but also usage-based pricing becoming more prevalent in there, and a lot of flexibility, allowing customers to pick things up and drop them as they need to as well.
Interesting. There's a lot to unpack in there, Michael. Thank you for that. That's pulling on that thread a little bit more. So for Sebastian, I'm curious, among emerging marketplace innovations like low-code tools or say multi-party offers, which do you think will have the most real impact on scalability and vendor success in 2025?
Yeah, so I think, you mentioned low-code. I think that's definitely something a lot of people are looking into, right? It's how do you build out your ecosystem? How do you bring in more vendors? And I think that continues to be important. But I think, from a more innovation point of view, multi-party offers, being able to bundle and combine multiple software vendors into let's say a personalized solution, right? So like what Michael was saying is people are engaging with these marketplaces because they're looking for a more personal approach to that. So I think multi-party offers are definitely something that are going to be seen as giving you an edge on other marketplaces. And to that end as well, I'd say being able to do private offers at scale. So when you're combining multiple software vendors into one solution, right, and you're catering more towards your customer, so you know what they want, you know what is valuable to them, and then being able to offer that at a competitive price. I think those kind of features are going to be able to drive more business than just being one of many, right? Like if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're only competing on basically selection. And I think some of these other things like multi-party offers, private offering, that kind of stuff will really help you distinguish your business from others.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got about 7 or 8 more minutes on this topic. So I'm curious to hear you together now. What you guys think from what you shared, Michael, from what you shared, Sebastian, if you play that forward and you had to bet on one futuristic feature, maybe AI search, maybe hyper-personalization, something else, what do you think is going to become the must-have in the next 1 to 2 years, and why do you think that's the case?
So for me, the topic here, the key thing is that, as you say, hyper-personalization, building a marketplace which is specific to an individual customer. And it pulls together a lot of those different components that you talked about, Dave, and Sebastian was talking about, in terms of having those private offers, multi-party private offers coming through there, the use of AI to create some of that personalized experience in the marketplace. How do you talk about some of those ecosystems and some of that bigger trend piece, making sure you can put all those little smaller ISVs that have been built with those low-code, no-code solutions into the marketplace in an integrated way. So for me, it's that personalization element that's creating a unique experience for a given customer. And just making that buying experience as easy as possible within and across an enterprise, and as you move further down the supply, the value chain as well, in size of organization. So there, I think a lot of the marketplace value sits inside of enterprises. But as they mature, I think you're starting to see an increase in adoption in that corporate upper SMB space. I think in that micro SMB space, you're still seeing people just buying SaaS services directly off the page. But I think you are starting to see a greater adoption of some of these personalized marketplaces away from the enterprises down into smaller organizations.
Yeah, and to build on that, what you're saying, Michael, is I know obviously AI is the buzzword, right? Everyone talks about AI, but I do think that with AI agents, there is a lot of potential to sort of build that white glove process, in a way that's scalable. So it's not just AI search, but it goes beyond that, right? It goes on to like AI assisted procurement, basically, where based off of customer profiles or historical data, you can give meaningful recommendations for like, this is what you should have, like this is what is going to drive your business productivity. And I think that, we're still a ways out from that. But I think that, and then combine that with like downstream orchestration, right? Where it's not just like, oh, you've bought it, now good luck with it, you have to set it up. I think, with that development, there's a lot of potential for automating that orchestration layer, for setting up after the purchase and making everything ready to go, so that, customers don't have to spend a lot of time and effort. Now they've got 7 or 8 vendor solutions or software, solutions in place, but then it's going to take them a week or so to set up. That's where a lot of them will disconnect, or they'll get frustrated and they'll have to jump on the phone, which is a negative customer experience. And being able to automate that, either through standard automation or through AI automation and agents, I think will also benefit a lot of those B2B customers.
Yeah, 100% agree, Sebastian. I think how it's got the marketplace have got to go beyond a place where you just transact and buy something. It's got to go into that provisioning piece, and actually that's where some of the AI and the automation capabilities that are there today really can streamline that for the end customer. I think it's an area where a lot of vendors have still got to do a lot of work. Spent the last couple of years working closely with a range of cybersecurity vendors, and they're still locked in legacy ways of doing business, and they don't even have public APIs to enable their solutions to be provisioned. And they certainly struggle to work in that traditional IT value chain across distribution, across resellers, across MSPs. And I think so. In terms of helping vendors build the level of capability they need to be able to be served through marketplaces in the right way. AI and some of those low-code tools are certainly going to help in that scenario there, because the marketplace is one piece, but the vendors absolutely have to be in the right place to work fully in that marketplace ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's something that I've, even 20 years ago, we were already talking about like activation rates, right? And it's one thing for a customer to buy the license, but if they're not activating it, if they're not engaging with it, it's, that's a sure way for churn and for them to just go looking elsewhere, right? So I think that like you mentioned, being able to work with vendors to be able to increase that activation and engagement rate, definitely, it's everyone's responsibility in that.
100%.
Interesting. Thanks, guys. But between hyper personalization and AI assisted or driven procurement, I mean, you're talking about an incredibly seamless one-for-one experience for the end customer. It's fascinating. I won't be surprised if some questions come up later in our Q&A on this piece. As a reminder for everybody we have joining us today, if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint that we're sharing, please feel free to reach out. We'll be more than happy to send it your way. Sebastian and Michael, taking that kind of into our second topic, from a technical and operational best practices standpoint as it relates to growth, I'd like to ask you both to highlight some actionable best practices for creating really scalable, efficient cloud marketplaces. So, Sebastian, I'll start with you this time. From a technical perspective, what are the most critical components a cloud marketplace needs to scale efficiently, and where do you see teams getting it wrong?
Yeah, so obviously scaling marketplaces for where you've got ever increasing number of users and accounts and customers. Most directly, obviously, you want to be able to make sure that your marketplace or your storefront, right, the part that users are interacting with is not going to be performing badly because of that load. So you need to be able to separate, let's say, that logic. You need to be able to offload things that you can do offline, need to be basically disconnected, right? There need to be asynchronous events that will happen. And then other parts, which is like where you really want to look into your user journeys and customer experiences. Well, what are the things that need to be happening straight away, right? If a customer takes 10 seconds to load your your product catalog, that's an issue. So it's mainly identifying those critical components based off of a user journey. What is the thing that your user is interacting with? And that's the part that you need to focus on. Everything else that happens later in the background, so from an architecture point of view, you have to offload that. Other things I'd say is making sure, and I see this a lot of complaints that are typically around billing and invoicing, where bills are inaccurate or they're late, right? And late is just as bad as inaccurate. And so from that scalability, you have to make sure that your billing engine is able to do what it needs to do on time. That means making sure that it's able to process everything within a certain time frame. It's able to process everything without dropping certain line items or other things, right? So I think those parts are probably the most critical. It's like your user interface layer, the things that people interact with, and then the billing, because that's your reliability, right? If your billing is off, that affects your reliability, and that, I guess, erodes trust between you and your customers. So those two components, I would say, are the most critical components that you need to have architected well in order to scale to like millions of accounts, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Sebs. Michael, from your point of view, operationally, what best practices have you seen successful platforms actually adopt when aligning marketplace growth with partner and go-to-market strategies?
So 100% agree with what Sebastian said, and being in that world where we've been providing services to customers big and small for years. If the billing isn't right, then yeah, you break down, trust breaks down really quickly. So that's having that just working in that sort of table stakes is really key. I think for me, the key piece from when you're building out that marketplace piece is that strategy's got to be business led. You don't want it to be technically driven. Obviously, making sure it's technically accurate is critical, but overall, you want your marketplace strategy to be a business-led strategy, where you've got your marketing, your product teams, your sales teams, and your technical teams working together to make sure you're driving that overall raison d'etre of why are you doing marketplaces. And likewise, agreeing with Sebastian that customer experience is absolutely paramount in this. It's not just the purchasing experience, it is the provisioning piece, it is the billing piece within there, and making sure that anybody can go in and just use the experience that's being provided. I think equally though, the experience for the vendors is really important. If you're wanting to have that broad ecosystem of vendors within your marketplace, you've got to make it easy for those vendors to be able to plug into that marketplace. And if they don't have full automation themselves, how can you still create a great end customer experience where actually the provisioning and process may be an offline process for that vendor, but it still looks like a seamless process that over time you could change into an automated process, but make it easy for the vendors to get in, to get started, to learn what's important, what their customers want, and then look to drive more automation over time, since they're using AI agents. And another key best practice for me is making sure you're using, you can generate huge amounts of data from marketplaces, understanding the journeys that people are taking, which products they look to buy next, how they search and how they find products within there, and making sure when you're designing and iterating the marketplace and the propositions and the offers you're putting out, really using that data that you build up within the marketplace to make sure you're optimizing your decisions based on that data you've collected and used within your overall ecosystem.
Thanks, Michael. I heard a lot of commonalities between the answers from both of you. I'm guessing that comes from hands-on lessons learned. So thank you both for that. I'm going to flip it now. So if I'll flip it to both of you if you don't mind. Where do you see the biggest disconnect then between technical execution and maybe operational goals when building a marketplace, and how can product and go-to-market teams work better together?
Yeah, so I think from my side, it is sometimes like a literal disconnect where you have, I guess, teams working in silos. I mean, I guess as a solution architect, this is somewhat close to my heart. It is, having someone who is, let's say, able to oversee all of the different disciplines and form those bridges. Having your operational team understand why certain decisions are made. From a business point of view, like Michael was saying, right, you have to drive these marketplaces from a business point of view, not just technical. And it's easy to focus on one or the other, but there is always a translation in between. Having the right people on a project that are able to marry those two together, I think, is very, very important. I think, instilling a culture within your company of having interest in someone else's viewpoint. I think that sort of open culture, I think, is going to be very important. So it's not just technical. It's not just like these features. It's really also how, as a company, you're interacting with your customers, you're interacting with your teams. Everyone is collaboratively working. So I think in that, to me, oversharing, I guess, would be a better way than just assuming someone else knows or doesn't need to know. I think those two, for me, are really, the biggest drivers of that disconnection.
Yeah, I 100% agree with your sentiments there, Sebastian. I think for me, the starting point to avoid those disconnections is having that customer-centric culture within your organization where all the different teams realize what you're ultimately trying to serve your customer, and that collectively we win and lose together. I'm a massive F1 fan, and the iterative approach that those Formula One teams take, and ultimately if something's making the car go slower, that's the problem. And how do you work together to fix that problem? How do you make the car go faster? And that's the end goal people have, and working towards that. And I think you do sometimes see competing needs across the business and what they may want versus what the technical teams may want. Making sure the experience is secure, you sometimes need to create steps that users need to go through to make sure they're accessing the system in a secure way. You might want to be enabling MFA, pass keys, sort of taking a more modern approach to security to make sure that user experience is still streamlined, particularly if you're jumping across multiple vendors and multiple solutions. To me, that end user experience can be a real point of contention where the business people are wanting a super seamless experience across all elements and a consistent experience. But then security needs can sometimes get in the way, being driven by the technical requirements of the platform. And I think, having that culture where you put the customer at the center of what you're doing, if there's a challenge to driving more adoption, more usage, more transactions, working together to solve those pieces, that's the way you drive and avoid having those disconnects, those silos of operation. So it's stuff for me. We're all ultimately, for me, every business is a people business, and it's making sure everybody's rowing in the same direction, and trying to create that best experience for the customer, because that's what creates the loyal customers. Because in a marketplace world, it's very easy for those customers to move their business elsewhere.
Sure.
And you want to make sure you're providing that best experience at all times, and that's in everybody's interest to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks, guys. I'm tempted, Michael, to take it all the way down the F1 path now, but that's not what the audience signed up for. Anything else on this talking point from either of you before we move on?
No, I think
there was a couple of questions I've seen in the comments. I don't know if you wanted to pick up on those now, which sort of talks about some of the pieces on some of those trends, and particularly like how distribution and enterprises are working in this space. So I don't know if you want to pick those up now or wait towards the end, Dave.
I think we'll pick up on those in the Q&A if that works for you guys.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So we've talked through the upcoming trends. We've talked through the technical, operational approaches from both a what works and what have you seen not work perspective. So as organizations are going through building a B2B marketplace, I'd like to address some of the common pitfalls, I guess, that you've seen in your experience and how to avoid those. So, and kind of specifically when talking about CSPs, identifying, mitigating common challenges as they're developing and scaling. Michael, I'll throw it back to you this time. From your experience, what's one major mistake cloud providers often make when launching or scaling a marketplace? And then what do you see as the smarter path?
So I think a common mistake for me is businesses treat it as a technical problem rather than a business problem. And it comes from the point of, okay, we're going to go build a marketplace, and that's the technical challenge as opposed to what's the actual business problem that we're solving for the customers that we want to serve. And for me, these initiatives should always be a business-led initiative, understanding who your core audience is for the marketplace, what are their needs, what does your audience want from that, and then crafting a solution that's customer-led, or certainly customer-need-led, rather than saying, I built a platform, the customers will come to it. And I think you can see people jumping on the bank and say, I've got to have a marketplace, without having actually thought through, who am I trying to serve with this marketplace? What are the specific needs of that profile of customer? What solutions do they want in there? How do they want to experience that? How do they want, say, that billing information provided back to them? So for me, it's absolutely making marketplace projects a business-led initiative. Make sure you've got a senior business leader as the overall owner of the project, of the initiative across the business, to bring those disparate teams together. Because if it starts as an IT project, I think ultimately you're more likely to miss the mark than if you take one that starts with the customer first.
Got it. Excellent, Michael. Thank you. Continuing on that. Sorry, go ahead. Continuing on that same thought there, Sebastian, when looking back across marketplace projects you've worked on in the past, perhaps, what's one technical decision that seemed fine early on, but then you discovered caused major issues as the platform grew?
Yeah, so I think, not necessarily, there's multiple technical decisions that happen. I think, piggybacking on what Michael was saying, right? Knowing upfront what your drivers are, what your, I guess, North Star is probably the biggest issues that I've found. Like where you have that lack, right? Where I guess a technical decision, the choices that are made in building marketplaces are based off of, let's say, the challenges being faced today in the immediate moment. But the challenge of today is going to be fixed, fairly easy, and then you're going to have another challenge tomorrow and another one tomorrow, and so what I've seen sometimes happen is that you get into a reactive mode of development, where you build it, you end up building more and more technical debt, and at some point you're always refactoring your, let's say, previous decision that you made in the spur of the moment, and it reaches a point where you're not able to innovate as fast. So I would say that from that, knowing upfront where you are now, but also where you want to be going, thinking about that, building out those designs, that thinking about what you're going to do before you really start doing it, is one of the key things that I would say is critical to not just developing a marketplace, but continuously innovating that marketplace. And then on the flip side to that, right, working in an agile way is you do have to realize you cannot design and architect everything up front. I don't think that we're in a world anymore where you can just sit down and work on something for a year and a half and then release it, because at that point you're going to be a year and a half behind the competition or the rest of the industry. So it's that trade-off between having your future vision ready and working towards that, but then also going back to the previous point we said, right, everyone is focused on that customer centricity. Everyone is working in an iterative way to keep expanding on that as well. So that's the balance, and it's a hard balance to make sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think everybody having clarity over what that North Star is in terms of whatever decision anybody's making sure they all understand this is where we're trying to go to. This is our purpose, our why, and that generally helps people make better decisions. Developers build a solution that works more towards that common North Star, and the commercial teams to design offers and propositions that are more aligned with that North Star as well. So yeah, making sure you get the foundations right and understand where you're trying. If you know where you're trying to get to, you're more likely to get there than if not. So yeah, 100% agree, Scott.
So, Michael, that makes me think of something, and this may be pulling off of that point a bit, but to both of you, where do you most often see misalignment between product engineering and commercial teams? I know we've all experienced that, and I'm curious where you see that, and then how you've seen teams better stay in sync during the marketplace build out.
So I think where you can get a disconnect is if you haven't set up the way people are targeted and incentivized within an organization. So you could have salespeople targeted and incentivized in one particular way. Your technical teams have got a different set of KPIs and measures, and things like platform stability and SLA and security are more important than the ease of doing a transaction and driving that through. And the marketing teams may be wanting to over-position what the capabilities of that marketplace are, because they're wanting to drive more usage and demand into the marketplace. But if it's not fulfilling the needs of the customers when you get there, so I think again, having that common North Star, making sure the teams are aligned, not just in where you're trying to head to, but in how they're recognised and rewarded. And I think disconnected incentive schemes or recognition within an organisation is one of the quickest ways to create disharmony between teams, because you'll have your technical organisation say we've got to go and hit these, and these are our absolute priorities, which could be different to what the marketing team are trying to drive or what the sales team are wanting to achieve as outcomes. So again, building some of those foundational building blocks within an organisation to make sure individuals and teams are aligned from the get-go is how to avoid that. And if you get in that situation where they are disconnected, it does take quite a bit of rowing back to make sure you've got that alignment in place.
Yeah, definitely. I think, with that, I've seen that as well, where incentives or KPIs are like drafted in isolation as well, right? I think that definitely leads to that disconnect. Having company-wide OKRs that translate into departmental ones and then translate into individual ones, I think that's very important to make sure that everyone has that same incentive, right? If you're focused on your own incentive, you lose track of that more easily. Whereas if everyone is working towards that common goal, that's going to help make sure everyone's noses are in the same direction, right? I think additionally to that, when building out the marketplaces, right, when from a software development point of view. I think there like methodologies like Agile, or even like in larger organizations where you're using safe Agile, I think are very important to make sure people stay aligned on what is actually happening. So, I know a lot of people say, well, I don't like things like retrospectives, or I don't think like, demos. I don't attend demos. I'll see it when it's in production. That kind of mindset, I think, is also important to get rid of, to be honest, right? Refinements, demos, retrospectives, I think they're very important to make sure that product engineering and commercial teams stay involved and stay informed. Because that also allows the entire organization to switch faster when the ship starts to sort of swerve or steer off course. It takes a lot of effort to get it back, and like the further down you are, the harder that becomes. So I think having regular cycles, 2-week or even 4-week if you have to, but like make sure everyone is involved, and people are not having these one-off or one-to-one meetings to talk about stuff, but bring that into a group. I think that's going to be very valuable as well, to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in the way of being able to voice it, but also being able to hear it.
Yeah, I 100%. I think driving success, it's a team sport, and if you're not prepared to be involved in that process, often sort of sales, oh, this is rubbish, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. If you're, as you say, if you're not part of those demos, you're not part of the retrospectives, you're not feeding into that cycle in a structured way, then it's your own fault if it's not doing what you want it to do. These aren't things you can just throw over the wall and expect it to come out right. It's about everybody leaning in, everybody working towards that conglomerate, and these things are a team sport. And you've got the devs writing the code, but unless they're getting steered and being told this widget is customers love it, or this widget customers hate it, providing that accurate feedback, and the sellers and your marketers should be much closer to customers and their feedback and the development teams. You've got to make sure you've got those feedback loops, and I think, as you said, Dave, that over communication within the teams and across an organization is absolutely critical to making sure you don't get those disconnects within, and make sure that if there's a challenge, you own it collectively, and you work collectively together to fix these things. You have to, at all costs, avoid a blame culture within an organization or within a project team.
Yeah. Once you get into an us and them scenario, I think that should be a red flag for realizing that that culture needs to be brought back to one unified team working together.
And I think that's where the executives within organizations play a pivotal role. It's those executives who set that culture, who cast a shadow across the organization. If you've got execs who shout and blame and what have you at different teams, and why did it do that, then that's not conducive to creating that environment where people want to work together. So I think setting the right culture, the right tone at an organizational level, and the leadership living the values of the organization, living the culture they want to see within there, and then holding people to account if you don't see that behavior. And I think teams collectively need to hold each other to account to the right behaviors as well.
Fully agree. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you guys for diving a little bit deeper into that one. We know we actively see those pitfalls hold up CSPs pretty frequently. So that's very helpful. I'm going to pull us a couple of minutes early into our Q&A. We've got a lot of questions here from the audience. So I'll lead with this one here. So for companies just starting their marketplace platform approach, is it better to launch with a narrow, highly curated marketplace, or go broad to attract more vendors and buyers early on?
So great question, James. I think it comes down to what are you wanting to achieve as business? What type of business are you? What end customers are you trying to serve? So I think the answer is it depends, depending upon what goals you're wanting to serve and which part of the value chain that you're playing in. If you're a particular vendor, you want to make sure your solution is able to be in as many marketplaces as possible. And you don't want to be having to re-architect your solution, your integrations for all the different types of marketplaces out there. If you're a service provider serving particular customers, you want to be creating solutions that are tailored to each of your customers. So it depends where in that value chain is and where you're wanting to, and what your business goals and objectives are as to which approach you would take for that.
Yeah, and I think from that point, it depends is always, I mean, for sure. And I think that's where it's important to really do research into who your customers are. Like, are they really going to benefit from you launching with 50 different vendors and solutions, right? The trade-off there is you also do have to be careful that, you need to launch at some point, right? And having going broad and onboarding 50 vendors, is going to take a while. So I think from that, I would say, do the research into your customers and figure out what are the critical solutions that they need. Launch with those. And I think, earlier we mentioned, and Michael mentioned as well, right? Not everything needs to be automated. So you might have a few vendors where, these are niche products, but are still important to, a smaller base. You might decide to not automate those fully at first, but then you are able to offer them as part of your overall solution, right? So there's middle ground to both. I would say that, probably launching with a somewhat curated marketplace is more beneficial than highly curated or overbroad one.
Thanks, guys. James, thanks for the question. Here's one from Austin. When onboarding vendors at scale, what's one piece of automation or process improvement that you think every marketplace team should prioritize first?
I would say, obviously when onboarding vendors at scale, I'm thinking of you're bringing in a lot of new vendors. I would say standardization is probably the main thing. So your marketplace needs to be able to abstract the vendor part from the marketplace part. And by abstract, I mean that every vendor will have its own API, it will have its own process, will have its own way of doing things. And if you want to onboard vendors at scale, then you cannot build every integration from scratch. So, having some kind of framework or abstraction layer or SDK or integration, layer in between, I think is going to be very important. And then I would say, obviously build out those critical vendors first, but fairly quickly, you want to make sure you have that abstraction in place so that after that, you might spend 3 months or 4 months building that framework, at which point maybe you're not onboarding any vendors, and that hurts. I get that. But after that, you're able to churn out these vendor integrations once, every 4 weeks, you've got a new, your team is developing a new integration. If you get 3 teams, then they can do 3 integrations every 4 weeks, right? So that's really the part that lets you scale up. Having that framework in place, I think, becomes very important. And that also requires research to see what are the unifying factors, right? What is true for all vendors that you're working with?
Yeah, I think building on that is that consistency of user experience. if you build, you don't want the user to have to go through a different journey or a different experience for purchasing vendor A versus purchasing vendor B. And I think that really comes back down to having that framework where you abstract the specifics of our individual vendors' work to make sure you've got your customer process within your marketplace as honed and as strong as it can be, and then have that, as Sebastian says, have that abstraction layer which plugs the vendors in into the process you've defined, but you want to make that integration easy. And saying if they don't have automation, enable some form of manual process in there, because that will help you get vendors in there really quickly. So I think focus first on the customer experience you want, so have that abstraction layer and make sure you've enabled some form of manual provisioning piece, because it's not just about all of the automations. If you, at some point, you can be relying on the vendor. If you're relying on automation, you can be relying on the vendor to do some work on their side. And that tends to be where the biggest delays are in bringing any vendor into a marketplace, is the scarcity of engineering resource within those vendors.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for that question, Austin. Here's one from Sasha. Any suggestion on how to avoid marketplace strategy misalignment between product, tech, and go-to-market? And if it happens, any suggestion on how you course correct it?
I think we've covered this piece in depth a little bit already. So hopefully, Sasha, we've answered some of this. But I think for me, you've got to start and make sure everybody's got that common North Star. Understand where we're trying to go, align those incentives across the different teams. And if you start to see the miscommunications happening, the breakdown, the political infighting, those side meetings that Sebastian talked about, you've got to bring it back down to those basics and make sure everybody understands the one North Star we're trying to achieve collectively together. So it comes down to good and sound management within organisation, and whether it's, and this applies for whether it's not just marketplace, but any element of your business. What's your purpose? What's the why? And make sure everybody's aligned in achieving that purpose. So it just comes down to good, strong, modern management within an organisation where you try and take everybody along on the same journey.
Yeah, and I think, to add to that as well, it's that alignment and equal value to a certain extent, right? Where, for example, go-to-market launches, they're partially industry driven, but you want to avoid where it's an arbitrary date that not everyone was actually informed about or had a voice in, where that kind of disconnect sets in sometimes as well, right? And then that happens sometimes, but you kind of want to avoid that through these strategy meetings, through, like, in safe agile, really large organizations will use that to do their PI train events, their PI planning events. I think those, like, they're very formalized in that methodology, but I think that they are very useful as well to sort of force that communication. If it doesn't happen naturally, you have these people that are on regular cycles of alignment, of planning, retrospectives, lessons learned, all that kind of stuff. So I think having some kind of methodology in place will give people, like, those handholds as well, so that even if you forget about it, it's a regular event that happens. So there's at that point no real excuse for not sharing that information anymore, right?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a heavy focus there on having a really clear, simple conduit from the feedback of what the misalignment may be to the teams that need to be responsible for it. And then, to your point, Michael, ensure that the response is all aimed at the same North Star and have that proper loop.
And as Sebastian said, something like an agile framework and a model of how you work collectively together, everybody understanding their roles across that model, that people are you've got to come in and participate in those retrospectives. You've got to be making sure you're putting in the voice of the marketing team, the sales teams of engineering, going into the prioritization of of that next cycle of work. And that's the next sprint. You've really got to make sure that everybody's bought into that, and it's a team sport. It's not the chief developer just deciding, right, I'm going to build these next 6 features because that's what I fancy building for the next 2 weeks.
I've got one here. We've got another from Sasha. Excellent. Sasha said, we see a good portion of distributors and enterprises still relying on traditional channels, sales through partners and resellers without the usage of marketplace and automation. From your perspective, what are they missing?
So for the last couple of years, I've spent most of my life working in the Microsoft ecosystem. And when you look at, say, a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Google, they've got all the automation and APIs that you could ever imagine, and they're constantly refining their model. I think the key pieces ultimately comes down to the vendors. They're the ones where that haven't implemented the systems, or they've got legacy ERP systems where they're not able to work within that marketplace model. I remember having a conversation with a big global security operations center provider and SIM provider, where their ERP could only cope with 3-year agreements with an annual payment. So in terms of being able to support a marketplace where you're looking to implement, whether it's monthly billing, quarterly billing, consumption-based billing, there was a fundamental gap that was a massive project for them to change their internal ERP system. So I think the biggest blocker in a lot of this is the capabilities within the vendors. The marketplaces, distributors are there, and I think are more ready and able to support these pieces. Some distributors, having said that, though, haven't adopted the marketplace. Actually, you still see a lot of very manual processes in distribution flowing through, and it's that traditional way of I've got a request for a quote, I'm going to send a quote, and then once that quote is going to get turned into an order, and it's a very manual process going through, again, tied largely to how the ERP systems for those distributors work. So it's making sure the back-end systems across that value chain are aligned to support the more modern marketplace way of working, that you can implement the required automation in there. And again, for a lot of these vendors, they used to a relatively low volume of high value deals flowing through. In a marketplace world, customers have got a very different expectation. So you need to set up the tooling within their organizations to support that way of working. And that's a massive change project for the vendors, as well as the distributors and the resellers and the MSPs who are in different places across that value chain.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, I think, especially for automation, and I think for scalability, there are a lot of resellers through channel, right, that have their own, that are working with their own ERP or PSA tools, that are, registering all of the stuff that's happening within their business, but then they still need to pick up the phone or log in themselves and manually fill in these orders. Somewhat near to my heart, API integrations and billing integrations. Having your marketplace expose reseller APIs, I think, is also a very critical component to that, so that your resellers, your channel can basically integrate their ERP or their PSA into your marketplace, so that they don't have to pick up the phone anymore. They don't have to log in and click through 20 different screens to do the thing that they've already done in their own PSA tool, right? And I think with that, and that's something that I've seen in my experience where, spending a year to build out a reseller API, and I think within, the first 3 months, bringing in net new resellers, because they were basically saying, like, I'm not going to use your marketplace unless you give me something like this. But these are like the resellers that easily bring in like 10, 20,000 seats each. Because again, they're not going to pick up that phone to deal with that kind of stuff, right? So I think that aspect as well, very important.
Yeah, and I think the larger, the more mature the reseller or the MSP, the more they want that automation. Yeah. I know from the distribution business I led, it was absolutely, you see the MSPs, they're using ConnectWise or Autotask, Kaseya, whichever their tool of choice is, and they don't want to be repeating things. They don't want to have to they don't want to put an order into their systems and then have to swivel chair and do exactly the same in your marketplace. You've got to have that seamless integration. And if the MSP is allowing the customer to self-serve in their PSA tools, you just want those things to flow through. So automation across the end-to-end life cycle. It's not just a point pieces across the value chain.
Yep. Yeah. Looks like we've got one more here from Dayon, guys. What are some practical ways to engage and acquire the first B2B customers for a new marketplace? In line with that, any tips on where to start and how to approach them effectively?
Do you want to take that one, Michael?
So I think for me, it starts with understanding your audience. So you say the first B2B customer, which type of customer are you wanting to acquire? Are you targeting enterprises? Are you targeting corporates? Are you talking SMBs? Are you wanting to go after customers in a particular vertical? So absolutely, first step is understand who your audience is and what their key needs are. And I think, as Sebastian says, you need to build out that sort of initial minimum viable product of what are the absolute core requirements. So if you take the legal profession and you're wanting to sell a solution and you're an MSP who serves the local legal profession, what are the core elements of needs for that type of customer? Make sure you've got that 90% good enough solution in the marketplace to start with. Then you can start adding on some of the smaller, more niche elements that might a smaller percentage of that audience needs, but make sure you're meeting the needs of 80, 90% of your audience to start with without aiming for perfection. But I think for me, the most practical and starting point is understand your customers. What do they need? Where are they buying today? And then start to make sure you're marketing yourself into where they are today and show them the benefits of why transacting into a marketplace is good for them and helps them either increase their revenues, reduce their risk, or increase their profits.
Yeah, and to that extent as well, there's one is identifying them. I'd say there's a ton of industry events, obviously that are held on a yearly basis. I think attending those, listening really to the pain points, not just having your own story, but going there to listen to their story, I think is going to be way more valuable, and that allows you to sort of identify like what is it people are really looking for, what is it they're not finding anywhere else, and then making sure that your vision as a company that offers a marketplace addresses those needs. I think that's the key thing there as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Dayon. We are right at time. I know we've got people all over the globe in attendance today. So Sebastian, Michael, thank you very much. Attendees, thank you very much for joining us today. Fascinating conversation. I hope we get to do it again. Thanks all. Until next time.
As well.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.